It's the 18th of September, 1944. They're a day late, but the men of the South Staffs grit their teeth and link arms as their glider speeds towards the landing zone. The Battle of Arnhem has finally started for them. This is a vital objective of Operation Market Garden, the daring operation to secure crossings over the Rhine and propel the Allied advance into Germany. Commanding B Company is 35-year-old, battle-hardened Major Robert Henry Kane. After a 14-hour forced march from their landing zone, they reach the outskirts of Arnhem, bleary-eyed and exhausted. The sight they see before them fills the men with dread and apprehension. Ahead is Arnhem, and it feels like the world is on fire. The sky is glowing red with tracer fire, and wood smoke fills the air. Embers from burning buildings burn tiny holes into the uniforms of the men from Company B, with smoke and haze drifting over the British positions. Further ahead, the once peaceful city of Arnhem is now a battlefield, and things are getting tough for the advanced units of the 1st Airborne Division, led by Lieutenant Colonel John Frost, especially when they come up against SS Panzer troops. The German resistance is very fierce, and elements of the 1st Airborne are already cut off and are at risk of being overrun. Kane and the South Staff were ordered to move out and advance towards Arnhem Road Bridge to reinforce Frost and take the fight to the Germans. Getting as far as Arnhem City Museum, Kane and his men have their first encounter with German tanks and self-propelled guns. The battle doesn't go well. They're outnumbered and outgunned and forced to retreat. He now knows he will not reach Arnhem Bridge and reinforce Frost. Frost and his men are now on their own and will have to fight for their own survival. The German tanks were absolutely fearsome, and the only weapon the men had against them were Piats, a basic weapon in anti-armor warfare. Lieutenant Georges Dupenois is the Piat man, but he's low on ammo. Kane and fellow Major Jock Buchanan scramble across the city streets, strewn with rubble, dodging enemy bullets to keep Georges supplied. When the tanks get closer to Dupenois, Kane orders 4 Bren machine gunners to concentrate their fire on the nearest one. Machine gun fire is nothing to Tigers, but with gunners opening up on them with bullets ricocheting off the armor, their officers must quickly drop inside the turret and button up. At that point, Kane nods to Dupenois and he fires his Piat at a range of 100 yards. But the 2.5-pound bombs bounce off the thick enemy armor, and Company B can barely delay or halt the tanks, let alone knock them out. Eventually, at 11:30 a.m., the Piat has run out of ammo, and the company has to retreat. From then on, the German tanks reign freely over the area and proceed to blow the sheltering soldiers out of the buildings they occupy. Eventually, the men are forced to retreat, and Kane orders a withdrawal to Oosterbeek, west of Arnhem. Oosterbeek is strategic and is protected by the 1st Air Landing Light Infantry Regiment, who are expecting an all-out German offensive at any moment. After a night of no sleep, an exhausted Kane watches a Stug 3 and a Tiger tank take a slow right turn and start rolling down the street towards the South Staff's position. With his complete loathing and hatred of tanks, Major Kane picks up his trusty Piat and goes out alone to deal with them. He lies in a shallow shell hole, and as the ground starts to shake and rumble, he frames the Stug's low silhouette in the sights of his locked and loaded Piat. Kane keeps his nerve, refusing to flee, flinch, or fire. That is until the tanks are close enough. After what seems like an age, the lead tank is only 20 yards away, and Kane opens fire. To his horror, it bounces off the thick armor. The Stug halts ominously. There's a short pause. Then it turns to bear the gun right at Kane's position. There's a flash, and the corner of a house explodes behind the Major. The rubble almost buries him. Although wounded by machine gun bullets and falling masonry, the enraged and furious Major continues firing until he scores several direct hits. The Stug jerks to a halt, then starts to smolder, with the crew jumping out before the ammunition cooks off. Now bleeding and in pain, Kane turns towards the second threat, the Tiger. He takes aim, 1 shot, reload, 2 shots, reload, 3. But his 4th round is faulty and explodes just in front of him. The Major is blown off his feet and his face is peppered with metal fragments. And what's worse, he's gone blind. He later said, "Shouting like a hooligan, I shouted to somebody to get onto the Piat because there was another tank behind. I blubbered and yelled and used some very colourful language as they dragged me off to the aid post. With the second tank closing, the light artillery regiment steps in with their guns, and the threat goes up in flames. Now wounded, blind, and shot in multiple places, Major Kane is treated for his wounds, and luckily recovers his sight. But against all medical advice and common sense, he refuses a morphine injection and rushes back to his position, deciding that he wasn't wounded enough to stay where he was. Over the following 2 days, the Tiger Hunter and his trusty Piat is everywhere where danger threatens. Moving amongst his men, he encourages them by his fearless example to hold out. He drives off 3 more tanks that are roaming the streets and sends them into retreat. During the battle, Kane's eardrums burst from his constant bombardment on enemy armor, but he continues to go out alone in search of targets. Being a practical man, he merely rips up pieces of field dressing and stuffs them into his bleeding ears. The Germans stage a large counterattack on Oosterbeek. The SS are in town with tanks, self-propelled guns, and infantry squads armed with flamethrowers to do everything they can to push the British back against the Rhine. Kane and his men have run out of ammo for their Piats, and so his only option is to grab a mortar tube. Improvising it to fire from the hip, he wanders about the place and fires mortars at the approaching tanks. One at a time, 6 tanks and an unconfirmed number of self-propelled guns are disabled or destroyed by Kane. After an engagement of 3 hours, his brilliant leadership ensured that the South Staffords give no ground and drive the enemy off in complete disorder, and they retreat, traumatized. Ultimately, though, Operation Market Garden is a failure, and the British troops begin to evacuate by crossing the Rhine. Major Robert Henry Kane has one last concern. He has to shave, determined to leave the battlefield looking like a British officer. Drying himself on his filthy, blood-stained Denison smock, Brigadier Hicks takes notice and comments, "There's one officer at least who's shaved," to which Kane replies, "I was well brought up, sir." When the crossing of the river starts, the Major ensures that his men have made it to the other shore before departing himself. When his turn arrives, he realizes there are no boats left. Kane and several other soldiers swim into the Rhine to retrieve a damaged assault craft. Using their rifle butts as paddles, they are the last men to make it to safety. In December of 1944, Major Robert Henry Kane was awarded the prestigious Victoria Cross for the gallantry, courage, and leadership displayed during the ill-fated Operation Market Garden. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel and please watch more videos of ours. Thank you.